What if I told you Bayonetta 3's ending, progression, and romance was a direct result that butterflied from the previous games, but it's much bigger than you think. Bayonetta 3 showed us the finale of Luka and Bayonetta getting together, and of course that caused a lot of stir in the community. Was it the Reverse-Florence Nightingale effect? The Oedipos complex? People started bringing up and countered Cereza's remark about them two always being together, when in fact it was Jeanne who saved her from Jubileus, or the fact that Luka was comically rejected multiple times, or Cereza went to hell and back for Jeanne, literally. You also have those old tweets by Platinum Games and Kamiya that showcase sources that favored Jeanne and Cereza ending up together instead of Luka. There are countless reasons that unfold to why this scene felt forced or didn't make sense. Or does it? By the way, every conclusion and point in this video is done through logic and understanding the poorly executed laws of this lore, without any sort of bias. You have to remember the concept of the multiverse that they introduced, at least, well, right in our faces, since it wasn't really obvious at the start to the majority. I remember seeing those posts about using footages of Bayonetta 1 and Bayonetta 2 to contradict Cereza and Luka's last moments together. While I saw the appeal and it was a great way to counter what was said in the ending, I remembered what Singularity told us. I think everyone, including myself, forgot that Bayonetta 3 is its own separate timeline. You can also argue it was poorly described as one. Yes, everything was done similar within this timeline compared to the other two main ones, like Bayonetta 1 and Bayonetta 2, but similar events don't mean exact. I believe the butterfly effect had something to do with it. When Bayonetta 1 Bayonetta empowered little Cereza in the first game, she grew up to become braver, and you can see the difference in her personality with how she reacted to her variants dying. The best description I could put for brave Cereza is that she had this for the greater good kind of attitude for her adventures, heavily limiting her emotions. You can even see and feel the contrast of the Cerezas since they reacted insanely different to their Jeanne's brink of death, with brave Jeanne even dying, while brave Cereza holds it in to fight for the greater good. We need to deduce what happened in this brave timeline itself in order for this scene to make sense. 1. Brave Cereza was never sealed, and has over 500 years more experience in combat over every other variant that was sealed. There is evidence that she's known Luka prior to the events of Bayonetta 3. It's just that it's likely she didn't meet him as a child since she wasn't sealed. I theorize she met her variant of Luka when they were both already past their biological 20s. 2. Brave Cereza, when she grew up, didn't experience the exact same events in the Bayonetta 1 we played. You can argue her Bayonetta 1 never happened. That's why I didn't really put it in the multiversal diagram. No Jeanne was going to save her. No Jubileus fight. None. So this scene that people said contradicted the line of then always being together likely didn't happen in the Brave timeline. But what about the events in Bayonetta 2? Well, we already covered evidence in a previous video that proves some did. The Loki cards. This indicates that brave Cereza met a variant of Loki in her timeline, and even possibly defeated Lopter with the least amount of struggle since she already had over 500 years more of survival experience. But here is where one of these sad realities come in. It's as if this brave Cereza didn't really need Jeanne as much. What I'm saying is that the impactful Jeanne and Cereza interactions we saw in Bayonetta 1 and Bayonetta 2 likely didn't happen in the brave Cereza timeline. Yes, Viola did talk about Jeanne being swallowed up by Elrond, but from what I see with how brave Cereza reacted, I theorize she didn't react as emotionally as she did as the Bayonetta 2 Bayonetta did. Heck, brave Jeanne probably defeated Elrond by herself. I believe brave Cereza's adventures with Loki, going to hell and back for Jeanne and fighting Lopter, was finished off super quickly without the need for Jeanne. It's also supported by the fact that in the prologue chapter, brave Jeanne is revealed to have been on her own adventures, or at least away from brave Cereza for a while.
Jeanne? We'll catch up later.
In contrast to Bayonetta 1 and Bayonetta 2, Cereza's had their Jeannes live with them. And I know they've been labeled as best friends in the marketing, but they didn't really click as best friends throughout the game. Their bond wasn't as deep as we saw in Bayonetta 1 or Bayonetta 2, likely because there was none of that yearning to see someone in a coma for 500 years. Now, people have pondered why brave Cereza would end up with Luka, when it was the same person that took care of her in the events of Bayonetta 1 when she had her adventures as a little girl. But again, they aren't the same person. Heck, you can even prove the difference with the scars that Crazy Gal found months ago, with the two Lukas having two completely different scars indicating a variant. I know, it's a very lazy writing device if used in saturation, but the multiverse. But is it the Oedipus complex? Well, no, they aren't even related. Is it the Reverse-Florence Nightingale effect?
That's the Florence Nightingale effect. It happens in hospitals when nurses fall in love with their patients. Go to it, kid.
No. The only ways you can make sense of it is that she has a vastly different personality in this timeline, as well as with all the other variants, where brave Cereza fancied the elements of who took care of her when she was little. There are studies about how a parent's familiarity influences one's ideal mate. In 2016, a senior lecturer in psychology at the University of Northumbria, Tamsin Saxton, went on to conduct an experiment to find out whether there is any connection between the quality of relationship one shares with a parent and choosing partners with facial features that resemble them. Women who retrospectively reported greater emotional support from their mother or father after menarche preferred partners whose eye color was closer to that of the parents. You can read the whole paper in the link at the end of this video, but you can even counter that Luka wasn't the biological parent, but Father Boulder was. However, you can also argue that Luka in Bayonetta 1 impacted brave little Cereza much more due to the Alice in Wonderland kind of adventures that they went on. And also remember, at the end of Bayonetta 1, it's likely she remembered her adventures as a dream.
Everything was just a dream.
When she woke up back in her original point in time. To put it simply, it's like as if you were brought to the future to see your future partner without any one of you knowing anything. We don't know the exact events that happened in this timeline, but we know the clues of her not having a deep bond with Jeanne, which hints that these scenes that you see right here never really happened. This is also why I think Brave was the best prefix and perfect description for this variant, putting the mission first over her emotions, for the sake of the greater good for the multiverse. And by the way, all that I've been describing and deducing was this timeline only. There are countless, infinite timelines out there, possibly in our multiverse for us, where you ended up with that high school crush you had, your neighbor, or that cute cashier you saw at Starbucks. It's just that it's pretty evident that Luka and Bayonetta ended up together in at least 2 timelines. Bayo Jeanne fans, I'm even on your side. Who's to say that Jeanne and Bayonetta in Bayonetta 1 or Bayonetta 2 didn't end up together? Because they were evidently deeply connected. But I think all we wanted was to have that visual dopamine rush of seeing them together, at least in one timeline. But we never did get it. You can even feel the personality differences between the variants. Bayonetta 1's Bayonetta had more innuendos and jokes carried in a more sexual yet empowering manner, who had this unstoppable drive to win but still had that compassionate side. Bayonetta 2's Bayonetta is my favorite on the personality spectrum, since she's the one who reacted the most emotionally to Jeanne. A good friend of mine even pointed out that if Bayonetta 2's Bayonetta saw her variants die in front of her, she would have broken down and likely wouldn't have been able to fight, where she will need her Jeanne to help bring her back up to emotional stability in order to fight. Bayonetta 4 will potentially bring back the main Bayonettas, or continue off with Viola's new arc as Bayonetta. But it's important to remember that if the timelines were restored, always assume each Bayonetta experienced a different series of events that essentially dictated the actions and choices that they made. And I know, that's common sense, but I feel like this video needed to be made. If in the case that Cerezas aren't returning, I think that this was their way of eliminating the confusing lore of the multiverse with a brand new slate with Viola. Bayonetta 3's Bayonetta fought for the greater good of the multiverse and honestly had the necessary mindset for it. It's likely why she's the only Bayonetta variant that pulled through in barely beating Singularity and arguably restored the timelines back, while the others failed to do so. I'm Rakun, and never get... Alright, I've been nice for too long.